everyone, and welcome to the Tarot On session for this evening. I'm going to be discussing a very powerful method for developing a spread in real time based on a querence question, and it's flexible enough so that you can come up with a spread that you can easily use with any deck for any question, even a very vague one. It's a very powerful technique developed from NLP, which we'll be talking about a little bit today as well. I've got some questions to answer for people about the Tree of Life that we're going to briefly cover, going back to previous sessions, and then we're going to be reading a little bit from Wake World in Conks Unpacked by Aleister Crowley, which is our bedtime story. Nice to see everyone in the group, and I hope you're all doing very well in the various states of lockdown. I read today that something like a third of the planet is now under complete lockdown. A third of the planet, a third of the population of the planet is now in lockdown. I went a little walk in our town here, and it was empty. Basically the whole town is empty at the moment and quiet. So I hope you're all doing very well under the circumstances that you find yourself in. We can't necessarily do that much to help, but if you've got like local volunteering places that you can go to, in this country they requested people to help out with the National Health Service that we have in England, and they were hoping to get 250,000, that's almost 250,000 people to volunteer within a few days, and they got over 400,000 volunteers in the first 24 hours to be delivering food, medicine to people who are in self-isolation, doing telephone work to contact people who might be by themselves, and so on. So there are lots of things that we can do for each other under these circumstances, I think. So I'll answer the Kabbalistic questions first because they're very specific, and I wanted to introduce an idea for our Wake World story later on, and then we're going to look at a practical technique that's very powerful. I think it's in Practical Tarot Techniques, and also it's in Tarosophy as well, and we cover it in several of the courses. But now I can give you a bit of an explanation and almost a demonstration of how the method works as well, because we're on video. And any questions that you've got, just add them into the live feed as well, and I'll try and answer them. Steph has just joined us from Germany. Hello to Steph. You'll notice that just here, can I point to it there through the miracles of video technology, we have the Dragon Tarot, which is this deck here. I was just taking some photographs of it to put up onto our Instagram feed as our tarot showcase tonight, and I'd forgotten just what a vibrant and wonderful deck it is, full of an incredible sort of design ethos, particularly for elemental work. If you like elemental work, seeing those in your cards, it's got a very good trick in it, that deck, and you can see that on our Instagram post this evening as well. So quick thing on Kabbalah. We will go back maybe over Kabbalah again several times as we go through these sessions, but if you want to catch up with where we are, then I do recommend going back through. I think we've done about 10 sessions so far, so do catch up with those if you like. I just wanted to indicate, I think Evelyn Hall had asked about the difference between the inner guide meditation, or the inner guide, I don't have the book right next to me at the moment, between the inner guide and the holy guardian angel, and I would add to that the higher self and the genius, and all of these terms that you can sometimes find in Western esotericism. So I thought I'd just explain my take on it just briefly to clarify, and also it will help us maybe as we move through Wake World as well. But just switch off for a second if this is of no technical interest to you, and then we'll get on to the practical technique in a couple of minutes. So to answer the question, the inner guide is basically a construct that arises from our own unconscious connection with the universe. So when we're relating to the universe from a sense of self, I am me, I've closed my eyes, I am visualizing, I have the inner guide, and I'm talking to the inner guide, and it is inside my head. That inside my tells you where you are roughly on the tree of life in terms of identity, because inside my head is a construct in Yesod. So the inner guide arises through our imagination of what the world, what Malkuth is like, through the world card or through the path illustrated by the world card. Of course, none of this is real. This is just as much a model or map as this reality as well. If you've been watching the third series of Westworld, the second episode, you'll see a brilliant deconstruction of that Gnostic idea that this world and even our maps of this world are constructs within a construct itself. Westworld has done very well at that sort of Gnostic paradigm, that we are living in a sort of fictional reality of our own making, or maybe of something else's making. So the inner guide relates to this. The Holy Guardian Angel is basically our relationship to the universe mediated through Tiferet. So when we're in this state and trying to connect to this higher state, the Holy Guardian Angel is a descending, arising, that then arises as the intermediary between ourselves and a sense of non-dualistic awareness, where we are just one with everything and there's nothing in between. There's no middle man, middle guide or middle angel anymore, and that's seen as being above the abyss on the tree of life, because this is a unity that exists right at the top. The concept of the higher self, I think, is very misnamed. And people, I think, get a bit confused by it, so I tend not to use it at all, unless I sometimes accidentally say it, or I'm referring to someone else's work. The higher self, to me, is quite often conflated with the super ego, which is a mechanism inside our own heads that is constructed from parental programming when we're very young, and that super ego then provides us a sort of ethical, moral framework of values that our conscious mind then interacts with. And the danger is that quite often, if you then believe you're talking to a higher self, and then even conflate that with a holy guardian angel, you then respond to that super ego and project it outwards. And of course, it's a very powerful, overwhelming thing. It's called the super ego for a reason. And what happens is the super ego then eats the ego, and the ego gets conflated with the super ego, and in that hour the soul is lost, because you're then well and truly stuck in Yesod, but you think you've pulled the whole tree down into it, and you often pull everyone else with you around you. So to answer the question, Holy Guardian Angel relates to our relationship of Tiferet and Kether, and the inner guide relates to our relationship between Malkuth and Yesod, and what that means in the so-called real world. Make sense? Hope I've explained that okay. So the other thing as well with the Holy Guardian Angel is it is often referred to Malkuth because it is our connection with the real world. It's our first connection with the reality of the world, unmediated by consciousness. And as a result, it's Tiferet, Malkuth and Kether almost resonating properly. That's why it's called knowledge and conversation. Knowledge is Darth, which exists as a rising thing up here. So it's basically an alignment of states in order to have a singular experience. And then it arises as a discrete entity as well, because after this point there's no self to have any awareness of anything, so something else has to have the awareness. Again, as Crowley says, the sleep world doesn't really have the language for a lot of the wake world stuff. So that's why we have a map, and that's why we have tarot cards, because we can make do with the pictures until we have the experiences. Okay. It's not very different when you get to the crown, as Ziga's pointing out, because there's no outside yourself, because there's no self, and there's no duality at that point to have an outside, inside, or anything else. There's no separation above the abyss at all, and that's why this grade here is called Master of the Temple. Now, that actually just leads me on to the other question I wanted to answer, which is again slightly technical, so we'll get to the practical thing in a second, but there is a model of the tree where Malkuth is seen as the daughter of the king, and this is where all of the princess type stories come from, and the daughter has to ascend to the throne of her mother, which is Bina. And so Malkuth, the world of activity, has to be redeemed and elevated to understanding. So there's no action anymore at this point, there is merely understanding. And what we are standing under, understanding, is Ketha, is the sense of divine unity with everything all in one go. So we stand under it here and understand it. But that takes activity, real world activity, to its higher place, and we're going to see that a little bit in Wake World as we go along, and that's one of the things. Just wanted to introduce that concept for when we get to it. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. It's all quite technical, and one could spend your whole life studying Kabbalah, and I would recommend it as a map, because it's a very powerful map of the universe. Now, talking of maps of the universe, we're going to get to our practical technique, which is this. And I also wanted to give you a big clue as to... I was trying to think of this a few days ago, and I was so tired I just forgot what the actual word was. But I was at a course a long time ago by one of the two creators of NLP. In this case Richard Bandler, John Grinder and Richard Bandler, between them developed NLP, which is a way of sort of modelling processes in the mind for therapeutic outcomes, and it's also modelled on the work of Virginia Satir, a very famous family therapist, and Milton H. Erickson, amongst a few other people as well. And basically they sort of modelled the language patterns that these people used so that they could teach, or allegedly teach, those language patterns to other counsellors and therapists without them having to really learn anything else other than the language patterns themselves. And Richard Bandler was giving a long rambling talk, because he sometimes talks for 2 or 3 hours, but embeds and demonstrates a lot of language patterns, and quite often puts you into a trance state while you're listening. Halfway through, I remember him saying something like, remember this, it's called the way in word. Well, I don't think he said it was the way in word, but he said always listen for just, because that shows you when someone is on the edge of their belief. On the edge of their belief. And he just carried on about something else, and carried on and carried on. And it really fascinated me, that just little snippet. And so I started to listen for it. And it's just that when you start to listen to it, you just hear it all of the time. People use the word just in a very particular way. It's just as if they can't help it. I don't know if you've ever heard anyone just saying it, because it just doesn't happen all of the time. It's just, we tend to ignore it. And sometimes it's just as if it means something, but we don't quite listen to it because it just goes under our radar. Can you see how often you can use the word just? It's just as easy as that. And here's the important thing for us as tarot readers. It really does show. Bandler sort of curved his hand like this when he was saying it. And my sense of it is, when you have a sort of conscious awareness of a problem that you're in, but and sometimes people don't have a conscious awareness of the problem or state that they're in. It's totally unconscious. They don't know why they're doing it, why they're compelled to act in a certain way. And through therapeutic and counselling techniques, you can, or all sorts of other methods, you can get to the cause and the reason, and maybe do something about it if you want to change that particular behaviour. But it's not conscious to begin with. The person doesn't realise that they're acting out some childhood pattern, or it's because of a traumatic experience they had, or blah blah blah. Now, there is an area in between the conscious and the unconscious, and this is when someone knows that they're knows where the problem is, but they don't quite know exactly where it's coming from. And that is that edge, that curve of their belief. And the word just is a linguistic marker for them being on the edge of that belief. And it's a really powerful thing to listen to. A powerful yeah, Natalie, you'll just hear it all of the time now. It's just impossible to forget, and it'll just annoy you how many times people just use it without even thinking about it. It'll just drive you crazy, really will. So what that word does for us is it allows us to listen very carefully, particularly when a client is giving you a load of information. Quite often with the sort of brief therapy practice or brief counselling, you may only have one session with a person, you may have 3 sessions with a person. You cannot afford to spend a long time listening, counselling for 2 or 3 years as eventually things surface. That's not the way that particular approach works. So what we just have to do is we just have to listen and find some way or some trigger into what's going on and what's going to be most effective with the time you've got. The same happens for us tarot readers. We just have to learn to listen in a particular way. And this is how it works. Quite often you'll get a client who'll come to you, or a friend will say, and if you listen carefully, I'm going to act as that person, that client, for a second. And okay, so I've come to you, tarot reader sat in front of me, that's you there. I've come to you and I've got a load of things going on at the moment. I just can't get a handle on them at all. And I don't know where to start, and there's a load of stuff going on. There's problems with my family, my kids are driving me mad at the moment, I've got a massive problem at work, and then all the things that are going on at the moment is getting on top of me, and my parents are ill, and I'm just carrying all of that as well, and there's issues with my spiritual path. I'm not quite sure where I am with that. Could we do a reading for that? And they will ask you to do a reading for the last thing they think of, or the thing they think is most important. But if you were listening, you would have heard a just in the middle of all of that. And you can go back and play the recording if you want. I gave one at the beginning just to trigger it, and one in the middle. And that just carrying it is the thing we listen to. So we don't do a reading for the question that they want to ask us. And this is quite a powerful thing to do. Quite often we say you must respect the person's state, and we must respect their question as well, and not try and reframe it or give our own question. But what we're actually doing is far more devious than that. We are listening to their unconscious question to get our best, most impactful point into their belief system with the time that we're going to have. So I would do a reading for them just carrying, I think that was following something to do with their parents. So I would say, I'd usually couch it very casually and say, I know that all of that's important and there's a lot going on for you, and I hear that you want to ask me about your spiritual path. But if I may, I want us to, I get a deep sense that we should just, and I use the word again, just look at what you're carrying at the moment. It seems to me that you're carrying a lot, and I would like our cards to do that if that's okay with you. And so I will make a counter proposal to them, and I would then get their permission to go along that. If they said absolutely not, that's not what I'm interested in, I'm here just to hear about my spiritual path, then I would stick to that, and I would feel as if I'd missed a slight opportunity, but it's the client first, so that's just the way that goes. However, most of the time you'll find that the person will follow that, and you'll often, virtually always, unpack everything else that's going on from that point, because it is that trajectory point into all of their unconscious stuff in a big bubble like this, and instead of skimming off the top, we go straight in, because that word just marks that very particular point. And if you can hear that, then it's sort of unpacking the stream of consciousness, going deeper from the start. It's really following that marker. In NLP we call them linguistic markers, and there's a lot of them, and quite often they reveal someone's meta model, their meta patterns, all sorts of things that are quite unconscious, allegedly, because there is still ongoing discussion about whether this is real or not. However, I find it acts as if it's real. It's like the Golden Dawn said, it doesn't matter if the gods are real or not. What matters is whether they believe you're real or not. And that seems to be the operating principle. It acts as if they are real, and so therefore we can act as if just is really a trigger word and act on it, and quite often that proves effective, because no one knows really why counselling and therapy is really effective. It's not down to the modality, people do know that. It is about the relationship that you have with the other person. It's about relationship between what's arising, not the surface stream at all. That's just a carrier for something deeper that's quite intangible and quite profound. And that's good enough. That's good enough. So anything following the just is the trigger for the reading. Yes, it just happens that that's the case. And quite often people will, sometimes they'll give you two justs in a long stream, but quite often it'll always be one. Quite often they'll say a whole load of stuff, and then they'll say, I just can't cope. And so I will then start with, can we phrase that as a question? How best can you cope with all of the things that you've told me? Okay? So we always listen for the word just. Okay, so yeah, and we are, that's a nice way of putting it, standing at another person's edge. In effect, we're inviting them to go with us with the cards to illustrate that edge, that space, that liminal space. And I sometimes call it walking in nothingness, or walking in the emptiness. You get suddenly it's like your feet really aren't touching solid ground. You don't quite know where you're going, but you do know that you're going. And quite often, particularly in a counselling or therapeutic environment, that sense of not really knowing what's happening can be quite powerful, and it often means that you're in the right space, and you just have to learn how to trust it above any sort of conscious manipulation. Okay then, so that's actually a technique in itself. It's a massive technique, and but then allied with the actual practical technique I wanted to discuss, it can be even more powerful. And that technique I wanted to discuss is how to turn any question into a spread. And this is 9 times out of 10. I either do a year ahead reading. When I'm doing year ahead readings, I do a Celtic cross, still even 40 years later, but with my own tweaks to it. But most of the other readings that I do are based on a client's unconscious metaphors, and I'd like to share with you a method that is in I think it's in Practical Tarot Techniques. I think it's in, I'm pretty sure it's in Tarosophy as well, and we teach it in a lot of our courses. And basically it's from clean language, which is a whole technique system in itself, which was actually modelled by a couple of people, modelling a therapist, he passed away a while ago, called David Grove, who I think worked in New Zealand. And David Grove had this very powerful way of working with people using metaphors and using their own language. And it was called clean language because we try not to put any of our own assumptions in the client's space. We truly honour where the client is. And so clean language has a whole load of techniques, language patterns associated with it, because it was modelled by NLP. Even though it's very anti-NLP, it's almost an opposite of NLP for all sorts of technical reasons. But here's a good simple method that you can use from clean language, and it involves feelings and it involves metaphors for feelings. And as tarot readers, unlike counsellors and therapists or NLP practitioners, we have an instant way of illustrating these things because we have our tarot cards and we can lay them out in a particular shape, pattern, what we would call a spread. So how do we find out what the client's best model is for working? A bit like we've used the just word to find the question, the real issue that we want to answer. How do we find the best way of working with them with a spread? Because a Celtic cross might not be the best spread for it. A 3-card reading might not be the best way of laying them out. You know, and we all have our favourite spreads. There are a number of clean language books I'll perhaps recommend. I've got a couple of favourites that are the best introductory ones. But I think the one actually by Lawless and Tompkins, I think it is called Clean Language, and is probably one of the best. But there are other books on metaphor use that build that up and are good for beginners. So where were we? So if someone has a feeling, okay, a general feeling, but they can't really give you the question, they can't really put their finger on it or anything else, and you'll hear that I've used a metaphor already, can't put their finger on it. And if we're struggling to work out what sort of spread to use, or we want to use this method, then here it is. So a person might say, say for example, they're having problems with their boss. Okay, they come to you and they want to read it because they're having a massive problem with their boss. Diane, if you want my references for every book that's in my library, this isn't my library, there's about 3,000 books in my library, I put them all into the Magister. The Magister was my brain dump of every book I found useful for 40 years, and all of the footnotes and the bibliography in the Magister, including NLP books, tarot books, esoteric books, all sorts of other books. I wanted to, for my own purposes, just do a brain dump of all of the references, so if I keeled over the following day or got hit by a bus, at least all of the books I'd found personally useful were all in one place. There was at least one list, and you know, any mistakes I'd made were all in one place as well. So the Magister does have my favourite, most useful books for all of this sort of stuff. So someone has a problem with their boss, they have this feeling, and you ask them, you want me to do a reading to help you work out what to do with your boss. Okay, so that's fair enough. You might do a Celtic cross, a Marseille reading, a Lenormand reading, a tableau, you can do what you want. But here's a powerful way of going about it, and this works with any question, any situation. Whenever someone asks a question, they're going to have a feeling about it. If they don't have a feeling about it, they don't know to ask you a question about it. So they must have a feeling. That's our first assumption, first working assumption, and it's always the case, usually the case, most often the case, just always is the case. And so you say to them, and you might notice as well there'll be some non-verbal communication that you can look out for, and this is a good way of practicing watching for non-verbal communication. You ask them a series of questions, and these are called clean language questions, and they follow a very specific pattern for a very specific reason. We won't be able to get into all of it today, but just trust me, this is for a very specific reason, and you always ask them in this order, in this way. Okay, so the first thing you say is, okay, when you think about your boss, or you think about the situation that they're asking about, when you think about that, is it inside or outside? The feeling that you get about it, is it inside or outside? So that's the first question. Is it, so we've already made a metaphor of it, we've turned the feeling into an object, a noun, is it, the feeling, inside you or outside you? Now, 9 times out of 10 people will look at you a bit confused and actually say, they'll say, oh, it's, I don't know how to describe it. And they'll wave their hands like this. So is that inside or outside? Or they'll go, well, it's just a feeling, just a feeling. But they'll have closed their eyes, they'll be holding their head like that, they'll move their shoulders up, so you know it's inside. And so you can say, I get the sense that that's inside, is that right? In clean language, you don't even say anything. You just allow them, you lead with the questions and allow them to just provide the answers. But in tarot, we're doing it a slightly different way. So first question, is it inside or outside? Now what you've got is a location of something. It's inside or outside, and it's a binary question. They have to answer inside or outside. It can't be anywhere else. So it forces them to locate something that is a feeling. Okay, so we've got a location now. And then you say, right, and what sort of size is it? What sort of shape is it? What shape does it have? No, sorry, hang on. I'm sorry, it's getting late at night. Got the question slightly the wrong round. The first question you ask is, what sort of colour is it? What sort of colour is it? Because colour then assumes that it has a shape. It has to have a shape to have a colour, and we're working backwards. So second question is, what colour is that feeling? Okay, so what colour is that feeling? So if they've done this, so when I think about my boss, I just get this feeling like this, and you ask them what colour it is. Because to have a colour, it has to have a shape, but we'll get to that in a second. So I might say it's red. It's a red feeling, and you can see what I'm doing with my hands. You might even guess, after a while, you can always guess where we're going already just from the non-verbal communication. So it's a red feeling. Okay, so this outside feeling that you have, it's red, and what sort of size is that feeling? What sort of size is that feeling? And they'll go, well, it's about like this, and they won't suddenly go like this if they've been moving their hands about here. They'll always go, well, it's about this, because their unconscious has already mapped it for you already. You're just helping their conscious mind catch up and give a framework for their unconscious representation of it. So first question, inside or outside. Second question, colour. Third question, shape or size. And they'll go, well, it's sort of like this. And you'll notice that they're now moving their hands in a slightly different way, but they're still zigzagging them. And then what you can say is, so you've got colour, you've got a shape, so they might say it's a sort of round feeling like this, and it's red, and it's outside, and then when they say it's red like this, or it's shaped like this, you then say exactly these words, and that's like what? Not what's that like, not what is that like, but that is like what. And you just drop it in very casually. You say, that's like what? And they'll have already gone into the state by now, because you're bridging that conscious unconscious communication. So you've asked them, what have we said? Inside or outside? Colour, shape and size, and that's like what? And that's like what? So they'll have gone, it's outside. They might even go, it's outside, I guess, and they'll do this. And then they'll say, so it's outside, it's red, and it's shaped like this. And then when you hit them with, and that's like what, particularly if they've got their eyes closed, they'll go, it's like, and you might already guess from this, it's like jagged forks of lightning just not hitting the ground. And they'll, like this. So jagged forks of lightning not hitting the ground. Okay? And that's like what? And that's like, always use and, always use linking words, so you can tweak this a little bit and get a bit more nuance with it by saying, and so as you say that, and as it's red, and because it's outside, what colour is that? Okay, so when they have said it's like jagged lightning not hitting the ground, there you have your metaphor. Okay, and now what you do is you turn that metaphor very literally into a spread. So for example, if they said it's like lightning not being able to hit the ground, I would invent there and then, I'd say, so what we can use is the lightning conductor spread. What we're going to do is we're going to do 4 cards for these lightning things that will tell us where the situation is coming from. We're going to do 4 cards for the ground to ground it, and then I want to lay 3 cards up the middle, and this will be our lightning conductor to tell you how to ground this relationship with your boss that's causing you this feeling. Okay? And I will only ever use the lightning conductor reading once, ever in my life, just for that one person there and then. But the next person will have the whirlpool spread. The next person will have the snake spread. The next person, I once did this on stage at a demonstration at a conference, and this person had a family issue they wanted to talk about. They were happy to do it on stage as a demonstration. They were quite a young lad, and they were talking about their family, and they ended up, and we did this third, it took about 30 seconds, and they said it's like a long river. And I said, like a long river? And I grabbed my tarot deck and I flung it across the stage. It was a massive stage, and the tarot deck went shooting across the stage, and cards turned up and cards fell face down, and it made a whole long river across the stage. And this lad sort of gasped, well, I mean the audience gasped because they weren't expecting it, but the lad gasped, and then we said, now let's read your cards. And we walked down the river together, and guess what? A load of court cards had turned face up, a load of them, and he identified them as his family members. And the further down the river we got, the more deep the reading got, until we got to him at the end, and then he could look back down the whole river of cards, and he had a perfect metaphor for the fact that he'd come from his family, they had created him, they brought him up, but now he was ready to turn around and go on his own journey, having come down that river and taken from it what he wanted. And you can't make those spreads up, you allow the client to give them to you. And if you're brave enough to actually go with it, then you will have some very, very profound readings with that method, and you'll never ever be stuck. You see, this is the great thing. I like to teach methods that are too easy to do, that once you know how to do them, they are too easy because they make sense. And so therefore you don't have to get stuck with it. If you get stuck, just ask the client to tell you. to help you with it, and listen for what they're saying, watch what they do with their hands, and incorporate and utilize that as part of your response to them. And this is one of the main tricks with philosophy, taken from sort of neo-Ericksonian NLP and hypnotherapy. Incorporate and utilize language patterns, and off you go. Just as a side story to that story, I was once demonstrating it, and this is why you must never do the same thing twice. Never do the same thing twice. I was demonstrating that story to a group in Singapore, and we were in a very small room, and there were a lot of people crowded into the room. And I said, and I was doing this reading, blah, 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 and I flung my cards across, and I flung the cards I was holding while I was telling the story to try and make an impression on the group. And as I let go of the cards, I realized that literally slow motion, as I let go of them, I could see that there were cupboards really close to me in this room. And as I watched, my cards slid across the floor, they spread themselves out, and a third of them disappeared underneath these fixed cupboards that were in the built into the wall. And to this day, I'm sure in a youth studies building in the middle of Singapore, underneath the Islamic studies cupboard, are a third of my tarot card deck still there. So never do the same thing twice, because it'll work the first time, but don't make a point the second time. Do something new the second time, otherwise you might lose a third of your cards. Luckily enough, it wasn't my, if it had been my original deck, luckily enough I hadn't taken that travelling with me, then I would have dismantled the cupboards by hand, and even missed my flight in order to have got them back out again. But this was just a demonstration deck, so I wasn't too sad to lose them. But it does make the point, and it certainly made it to me, that I'll never do the same method twice. Okay, and I just imagine when you know, in 10 years' time, when they renovate that room and they think, oh, what were the Islamic students doing in here? Were they secretly reading tarot or something? So that's the method. So we've done two methods really, just which I call the way inward, because it's the way into the specific conscious unconscious bridge, the trigger that you want to really utilize most effectively. And we have done clean language, turning any question into a spread through the use of metaphor. And it doesn't matter what the metaphor is, no matter how ridiculous it is. I think in Tarosophy I talk about the bull in a china shop layout, but you'll never be short of a layout, and quite often I usually use about 15 cards, maybe between 9 and 15 cards, because it's how many people can reasonably remember as discrete chunks of information. I think it's 7 plus or minus 2, so it's sort of 5 to 9 things they're going to remember from the reading, specific things. So that's why most spreads, quite naturally, if you've ever wondered why they're between 10 to 15 cards, it's because that just overloads a client with more information than they'll remember from the actual reading consciously. And that's the reason why we don't all do 80 sort of 64 card spreads as a matter of course, or 2 card spreads, and no one's ever thought of doing a 5 or 10 card one. They tend to average around 10 to 12 cards, because consciously we remember 7 plus or minus 2 bits of discrete information generally. Okay, so having said all of that, let's get back to, they were on their honeymoon, weren't they? We left them, yes, we left them on their honeymoon. So Lola and the Fairy Prince are heading up the Tree of Life. They've just had a very strange death and rebirth and marriage ceremony in Tifreth, which you'll now realise is talking about this linking of Ketha, Tifreth, Yesod and Malkuth on the central path of awareness. These are states of awareness as we move up. If you want to know where someone is on the tree, you just listen to the questions asked about life, because they change depending on where you are on the tree. Someone up in Keitha is not going to ask the same questions about the universe as someone in Yesod, that is for sure. Okay, so we've got to here, and we're probably going to head up Hesed and Geburah, which is might and mercy, strength and mercy, fear and love, connected by the strength card, and we have justice and the hermit connecting them as well. We also have the hanged man and the wheel coming down these two pillars here as well. So these are the cards we're looking at: strength, justice, hermit, hangman, wheel, and we've got Hesed and Geburah as we leave strength. We can't go quite up the middle. We can try, but we'll get turned back because we're not balanced. We'll try going one way, we're not balanced. We try going the other way, we're not balanced. Go back to the beginning, and then if we do bother to try again, we'll find we're not balanced and get let in. So let's see what happens after the honeymoon, or during the honeymoon. Okay, so here we go. Part 3. We're on part 3 now. Part 3. You mustn't suppose the honeymoon is really ever over, because it just isn't. But he said to me, "Princess, you haven't been all over the palace yet. Your special house is the third, you know," that's Bina, "because it's so convenient for the second, where I usually live. The king, my father, lives in the first. He's never to be seen, you know. He's very, very old nowadays. I am practically regent, of course. You must never forget that I am really he. Only one generation back is not so far, and I entirely represent his thought. Soon," he whispered, ever so softly, "you will be a mother. There will be a fairy prince again to run away with another young, pretty little sleepyhead." Then I saw that when fairy princes were really and truly married, they became fairy kings, and that I was quite wrong ever to be ashamed of being only a little girl and afraid of spoiling his prospects, because really, you see, he could never become king and have a son, a fairy prince, without me. But one can only do that by getting to the third house, and it's a dreadful journey, I do most honestly assure you. There are 2 passages, one from the 8th house and one from the 6th. The first is all water, and the second is almost worse, because you have to balance yourself ever so carefully, or you fall and hurt yourself. To go through the first, you have to be painted all over with blood up to your waist, and then you cross your legs, and then they put a rope around one ankle and swing you off. I had such a pretty white petticoat on, and my prince said I looked just like a white pyramid with a huge red cross on top of it, which made me ever so glad, because now I knew I should be saviour of the world, which is what one wants to be, isn't it? Only sometimes the world means all the other children in the dream, and sometimes the dream itself, and sometimes the wake things one sees before one is quite awake. The prince tells me that really and truly only the first house where his father lived was really a wake house. All the others had a little sleep house about them, and the further you got, the more awake you were, and began to know just how much of dream there was and how much awake there was. Then there was the other passage, where there was a narrow edge of green crystal, which was all you had to walk on, and there was a beautiful blue feather balancing on the edge, and if you disturbed the feather, there was a lady with a sword, and she would cut off your head. So I didn't dare hardly to breathe, and all around there were thousands and thousands of beautiful people in green who danced and danced like anything, and at the end there was a terrible door, 5th house, which is the royal armoury. And when we came in, the house was full of steel machinery, some red hot and some white hot, and the din was simply fearful. Din, incidentally, is Hebrew for fear. So to get the noise out of my head, I took the little whip I got earlier and whipped myself till all my blood poured down over everything. I saw the whole house like a cataract of foaming blood, rushing headlong from the flaming and scintillating star of fire that blazed and blazed in the incandescent dome, and everything went red before my eyes, and a great flame like a strong wind blew through the house with a noise louder than any thunder, so that I couldn't hold myself hardly. And I took up the sharp knives of the machines and I cut myself all over, and the noise got louder and louder and louder, and the flame burnt through and through me, so that I was very glad when my prince said, "You wouldn't think it, would you, sweetheart? But there are lots of people who stay here all their lives." So we shall leave Lola on her further journey up the Tree of Life, having entered into the 5th house of Geburah. And yeah, I'll put a link to Wake World that we're reading from, so that you can read along and look at the side references and the notes, which give you a navigation through it. So I hope that's been useful to you with the the way inward. I'm not buffering, the world is. So just listen out for when people just use that word, because it just gets so annoying when you just can't stop hearing it. It's just really a pain, but it isn't. So, and we've done our turning metaphor into a spread as well. I have to try and remind myself so that I can put it in the labels, so that we know roughly where we are as we go through the following days, because we're already about 7 hours in, so I hope you've been able to stick with me for 7 hours, and we'll have many more hours to come as well, and we'll get through all the way up the Tree of Life and before you know it. Okay, take care everyone, look after yourselves, and look after each other. Okay, take care. Yeah, thanks, and it was just really great. Okay, thank you, and just look after yourself. Bye for now.